Well, if you're looking for a challenge, there is no better time to be alive than right now.
Amen.
This is sort of the creme de la creme of opportunities for Christians. We are going to be able to lay more crowns at Messiah's feet, having come through this next period of time, than any other generation in human history. You talk about a target-rich environment. We have gotten there. I was asked to share my testimony today with all of you, and it's difficult for me to do because my testimony is ongoing. And my testimony, I don't believe, started at my birth. I believe it started much, much, much before that. I believe that my testimony begins in eternity. Because I serve a God who is not a God that is locked into time or space. He's not locked into the profiles that we have as human beings who face the finiteness of our lives. The Lord said in Jeremiah 1:5, "Before I formed thee, and I knew you before I formed thee in the belly of the womb. And before thou camest out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." None of us here is an accident. Before the worlds were framed, you were given a destiny. An eternal destiny. God made you unique in all the world. There is no one else in the history of civilization that is you. You are given a destiny that no one else can walk out. Jobs that no one else can fulfill. God made you unique in all the world. Which, by the way, is when one thinks of abortion. 56 million destinies that will never be walked out. 56 million unique individuals assigned by heaven itself with a task. That the bloodlust of humanity, which is still not satiated even by 56 million murders here in this country alone, not to mention the abortion we have exported worldwide, still isn't satiated. That bloodlust still prevails. Planned Parenthood was caught last week selling body parts. Isn't it interesting? They tell the world that it's not a human being, it is pregnancy tissue, until they manage to rip it from the womb, and then suddenly it becomes human being because they sell it as human body parts. Under a bizarre medical licensing by the federal government of the United States. Somehow I find it hard to believe that we have come this far from our founding fathers. Do you know who came to this country? Do you know how all of this began? Our history, our testimony, both as a nation and as individuals, goes back so far. It goes back to the blood-stained hill of Calvary. But even before that, it goes to the creation of the world. God made a world for humanity. He created a universe to stick us in, that we might walk out that calling that He's given us. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the God of heaven making man the crowning glory of His creation and placing him on an earth that He created for them? And evolutionists are trying to tell us that, no, this is just Big Bang Theory. I lived a few years in Iowa in high school. Now you would think after 150 years of farming the land in Iowa, that they would pretty much have cleared all the rocks and stumps and trees out of everywhere they want them cleared from. But not so. Fortunately, they had still left a few for us. When I was in high school, as a teenage boy, we used to have a job of picking up rocks, debris, and digging stumps out of fields in Iowa. My father saw to it that I was on a number of those committees that went out to do that work. My father being a believer in hard work, and particularly when I would misbehave, I noticed that the frequency of my involvement in such tasks went up dramatically. But it was a lot of fun. I've got to tell you, there were certain occasions that it was worth going. It was almost worth getting in trouble just to get the job. You see, we found out that sometimes stumps were too big to be hauled out. You couldn't dig them out, you couldn't dig around them, and they were breaking plows and everything else. So we got to do something that was more fun than you can possibly imagine. That is dynamiting stumps. Now, if you've never dynamited a stump, you ain't lived. Dynamiting stumps is more fun than chasing monkeys in the zoo. This is a good time. Drill a few holes, pop in the dynamite, light the fuse, and then run like the devil himself's after you. When those things go off, I mean, it is a bang. And stuff flies everywhere. Now, I mention that to you for one reason. Because evolutionists try and tell us that the world was created by a big bang. The universe exists because of the big bang that took somehow and created. I've seen a lot of explosions. And in blowing up all of those stumps, I have never yet blown one up and it came back down to earth as a coffee table, an armoire, or a headboard. Ever. It just made splinters and noise. Splinters so small that basically it was powder. To believe that a big bang is going to create the universe is a bit far-fetched to begin with. To believe that nature itself created life. I've been through some hurricanes and I've been through some tornadoes. And I have never yet seen a tornado hit a building and it come out better than it was before the tornado got there. It's kind of the laws of thermodynamics. Things have a tendency to decay, not improve. Weather has a tendency to destroy, not to improve. That is violent weather. The Big Bang Theory is frankly ridiculous. And it takes so much more faith to be an evolutionist. I mean, think about it. Creationists only have to believe in God. Evolutionists have to believe in this Big Bang Theory, and to have a Big Bang, you need what? You need someplace, you have to have a substance that can blow up. You have to have mass. And you have to have some sort of energy. So, to believe in the Big Bang Theory, you have to believe first in an eternal universe. And that, by the way, is one of the postulates of the Big Bang Theory, an eternal universe. Isn't it amazing? We can't believe in an eternal God, but we've got to believe in an eternal universe. But for Big Bang to work, in addition to an eternal universe, you've got to believe in an eternal dust cloud, because you have to have something that goes boom. Something that blows up, creates all this. And you also have to have, then, an eternal gas cloud. Something that mixes with it and blows up. Trillions and trillions and trillions of miles of empty space. And somehow, this eternal gas cloud gets together with this eternal dust cloud and creates a Big Bang. Well, the problem is you still need an accelerant. A match. You've got to have something to blow this up. So now you've got an eternal universe with an eternal dust cloud and an eternal gas cloud and now an eternal match. But a match doesn't strike itself. So now you have to have that eternal match attached to an eternal hand. And that has to be attached to an eternal arm. And that has to be attached to an eternal body. And that has to be attached to an eternal mind that has reasonable, rational thought to strike the match to blow it up. And if you've got all that, doesn't that sound a whole lot like God in the first place? So evolution itself points right back to God. You know, I've got a cousin who's a mathematician. As we used to say down home, he's brighter than a tree full of owls. Well, he's into all this. Well, I'm not sure what he's into, because most of what he says I don't understand. When I get done talking to him, I'm still trying to decide whether it was English or not. But he was telling me about quantum physics and how it points to creationism as opposed to evolution. Now, I got to be honest with you. Talking to me about quantum physics is akin to giving reading lessons to a donkey. It may not be wrong, but you really need to guard and limit your expectations. Because you ain't going to get a whole lot out of me when it comes to quantum physics. It just ain't me. He went through the whole thing, and the one thing that I got out of this was this. If you take the theory of quantum physics and you take the theory of Einstein of relativity and you put the two together into one long mathematical equation, it comes out to a symbol that scientists hate, and that is this sideways 8. It stands for infinity. And science hates that because infinity is the God symbol. Isn't it amazing that these laws, which by the way are in complete opposition to each other, that is what happens around a black hole and what happens on Earth, are completely opposite of each other. And if you take those two theories and you put them together in a mathematical equation, it comes out and it says God. You see, that's our testimony, folks. No matter how they try and twist it and turn it, that in essence is our testimony. I was raised in a Christian home. I preached my first sermon at age 13 at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Springfield, Illinois. I was raised by Christian parents. My dad has gone on to be with the Lord. That is part of my testimony. But everything that God has done from the beginning of time until now, even before the beginning of time, is part of our testimony. In 320, Constantine saw supposedly a cross in the sky and became a Christian. And he took Christendom, the church, and he made it part of his kingdom. That was set up in Rome. And the Pope, by the way, at the time was a guy by the name of Sylvester. The previous 12 popes had been martyred. He decided that martyrdom was not something that he aspired to, so when Constantine offered him a deal that they could combine church and state, he jumped at it willingly because Sylvester decided he wanted to be around long enough to collect some of his retirement. That at the time was the church, really established the Church of Rome. Prior to that, the church had been run by the Church of Jerusalem. The Church of Jerusalem, as you probably know, kept the Sabbath days, the holy days. It was a New Testament version of the Old Testament church. Well, that kind of put them at odds, and those conflicts really fueled much of what happened in history and in Europe throughout the ages. For instance, we hear of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were a part of the Roman Church. They went to Jerusalem for two things. Supposedly to guard the pilgrims who made pilgrimages there, but in reality, it was at war against the Jerusalem church and to take the temple treasures. That's what the Knights Templar did. They brought them back to the Rothschild family, and the Rothschild family set up what we now know as the Illuminati. They set up fractional reserve banking, and they promoted war across the globe. And the wars across the globe were fought because the Rothschilds were able to go in and say, listen, your neighbors to the east are preparing war. You've got to get ready. So they'd sell them all the war implements they could, and they said on one condition: we take over the banking in your nation. And they introduced fractional reserve banking, much like our Federal Reserve. All of these things through all of this history have been a part of what Christendom has seen and what Christendom has done, and is a part of our testimony, and more important than we can possibly imagine. Because as Christendom, true Christendom, was more and more persecuted, we saw the rise of people looking for someplace else to go, like Christopher Columbus, who, by the way, was an Italian Jew. Little did Ferdinand and Isabella know that he was an Italian Jew, because remember, in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Ferdinand and Isabella had just started up the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, by the way, was set to do one main thing: get rid of all of the Jews in what became Spain and Portugal. Why? Because they were international bankers with lots of money? No. Because the Jews that were in Spain and Portugal were primarily followers of the Jerusalem church. Rome had been at war with the Jerusalem church since at least 320, and probably before that. And they caused the Jews to run, to flee, and that created a diaspora of faith. And faith spread across the world. So even in persecution, even in that which was ugly, God used it to be a blessing. And as Columbus sailed, and as you look at his diaries, Columbus didn't just sail to make Ferdinand and Isabella rich. That, frankly, was a secondary reason, an excuse to go, an excuse to get financing. And by the way, Christopher Columbus's real name was Cristobal Colombo. Colombo was a prominent Jewish family. Many of his kinfolks and relatives had already been jailed and persecuted under other inquisitions led by the papacy. The Spanish Inquisition, led by Ferdinand and Isabella, chased the Jews from the shores, but it also financed, because of all the money that they stole, it was able to finance the voyages of Christopher Columbus. But in his diaries, Columbus said that he was going to seek riches for Ferdinand and Isabella because that paid for the trip, but his real work was to find a land where he and others like him could worship. You see, he was a Messianic Jew. And that was not a popular thing anywhere in Europe. So because of that persecution, Columbus was driven to make this voyage. Went to Ferdinand and Isabella on many, many occasions to get the money to go. And finally, because of the persecution of the Jewish Christians and the purloining of their estates and their goods, they financed the voyage, and Christopher Columbus went. And he found a land that was just south of America, although he's given credit for discovering America. He actually discovered the Caribbean, which a lot of Americans like. He got there, and we're told what a vicious man he was. Well, in reality, the tribe of Indians that he met there had only been there 3 weeks, and they'd only been there 3 weeks because it took them a long time to kill and eventually eat the people that had been there in front of them. So when we hear all of these stories about how horrible Columbus was, and these poor, innocent Indians being savaged by the white man, well, all right, but they savaged the people that were there ahead of them. Because man has always been savage outside of the grace of God. When you look at the history of the world, it is a history of savagery and bloodshed. Because it's only God, it's only Yahweh that changes the hearts of man. So in 1492, Columbus sailed and he found America. And in 1620, the Mayflower sailed with the Speedwell alongside. 2 ships, not one. Most people don't know that about the Mayflower. It had a partnership, the Speedwell. The Speedwell was the sister ship of the Mayflower, and they were filled with an interesting lot of people. Mayflower basically had 2 kinds of people. They had the separatists, or the Puritans, who were at odds with the Church of England, and therefore wanting to get out of England and go anywhere, even to America, rather than stay in England. Because to stay in England was almost certainly to be put to the stake before it was done, and set on fire. If you ever read Fox's Book of Martyrs, they talk about all the martyrdom at the stake. All the Christians that were burned for their faith. That, by the way, primarily Jerusalem church Christians, by the way, because they didn't do the Sunday thing at the Church of England. In fact, I remember a specific story. 3 men were captured at one time, and they were all scared to death. And the first one that was chosen to go to the stake said, "Listen, here's what I'm going to do. When they light me on fire, if God gives me grace to bear even this, before I die, I will raise my hand and put up my finger that you'll know that God has given me strength to do it." And they lit him on fire. And after he was burning, his body was literally on fire, he raised a hand that was burning in the fire with one finger up, letting his compatriots know, God's given me grace for this. Those are the kind of people that came here. The Pilgrims, well, the Pilgrims were the people that had fled England and gone to Holland, because Holland was much more liberal, always has been, much more liberal, and allowed them to worship as they chose. They were part of the Jerusalem church. They then came back to Plymouth, England, for one reason, and one reason only, and that was to organize the voyage to go to America. It had a crew of 33, a total on the ship of 103 persons on the Mayflower. The Speedwell, on the other hand, had mostly businessmen, adventurers, and rogues who were heading for America to get whatever they could out of it. 3 times they set sail. 2 times the speed well developed leaks and had to go back. The 3rd time they sailed without the speed well. So guess who was on board? It was just the Puritans and the Pilgrims. Those are the people that landed on the shores of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. 2 months later, or 2 weeks later rather, they sailed up to Plymouth and founded their colony, but they stayed on board the ship for 2 months. And the first document they created, by the way, was the Mayflower Compact. And it basically guaranteed that they were going to live their lives on that continent as Christians, as believers. These are the people that came here. People who were fervent for God. Do you think that's not a part of our testimony? That is a part of our heritage. It is who we are. It is what our nation was about. It wasn't founded here for economic purposes or for political purposes. It was founded for religious purposes. Men and women who demanded that they have the right to worship God in their own way. To go to the throne of Yahweh without the government telling them how to worship. Our First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And yet we've just had a Supreme Court ruling that says homosexual marriage is legal across the land, and that anybody who opposes it is in violation of federal edict. That means that soon, very soon, pastors are going to be finding themselves sued for refusing to marry gay couples. Pastors are going to soon find that their churches are at risk, their pensions are at risk. Elders and members of the church are soon going to find that the courts will find deep pockets in them and take from them their houses, their cars, their savings, etc. as a result of huge, huge liability settlements as a part of the homosexual movement, because the homosexual movement was never about gay marriage. It was about ending religion in America. You see, government has become decidedly anti-Christian. It has become the God state. Interestingly, in 1993, I wrote a book called Checkmate the Game of Princes. And I said in that book that this is exactly what government would do, what the homosexual movement would do. This is the course we have set. Well, we have arrived. But that's not where we started. Moving down the road in history in America, we had the first Great Awakening. This is preachers like George Whitefield. These are men of God who, George Whitefield, by the way, was one of these preachers who could preach to 100,000 people with no amplification outside. That was the quality of his voice. He cut his teeth in the gospel getting basically thrown out of England because he preached to the miners and the field workers. Not in churches. Not approved by the Church of England. But he preached to lost souls, and that's what the Lord sent him to do. And when he came to America, he did the same thing. He preached. Trying to think of the pastor's name who was the author of the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. These were the kind of men that were preaching as our founding fathers were developing their understanding of government and politics and Christianity. And it was a result of that first Great Awakening that gave us the Revolutionary War. For 2 years, starting in 1774, we organized a Continental Congress. And that Continental Congress for 2 years had been going back and forth on what they were going to do with the separation of the United States or the colonies from England. The debate was so spirited, it says that oftentimes pistols would hit the tables. That is, one more word out of you and I just about had it. 2 years they fought over this. Even after Lexington and Concord. Gentlemen, why stand we here? I remember Patrick Henry's famous quote. Why stand we here while our brothers are in the field? As for me, give me liberty or give me death. But in 1776, they'd been debating for 2 years. What are we going to do with England? What are we going to do with the situation? So on June 11th, the Continental Congress picked out a committee. Franklin headed the committee. Adams was on it. So was Thomas Jefferson. And all four, plus Jefferson, determined they were going to write a document that would change the thinking of the Continental Congress, who had been hung up on this political debate for so long. Franklin, being the wise guy that he was, and I don't mean wise guy, I mean wise man that he was, said, you know, the real wordsmith among us is Jefferson. So Tom, here's the job. Write us a document that's going to wow everybody and get us out of this mess. So Thomas Jefferson set to writing. And he asked himself a very important question. He said, to whom are we writing? Well, we're writing the world to tell them what we're doing. Somebody should let them know this is what this is about. We're writing King George out, and Jefferson, the supposed deist, understood the nature of the people around him. He knew that they were the product of the First Great Awakening. These are men who cut their teeth on the powerful preaching that had been a part of their world for 50 years. And so he wrote a different kind of document. And here's what he said. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Not postulates, not theorems. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Any idiot can see this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, I use that word endowment very carefully. You see, an endowment is something that is sacrosanct, inviolate. You can't touch the endowment. You can touch the fruits of the endowment, but only the endower has the right to touch the endowment itself. And that was the spiritual basis upon which he approached the other gentleman. He didn't write a political argument, he wrote a spiritual argument. He said, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And anyone who touches those things is a heretic because they have touched that which is the endowment of God alone. And then he listed the ways in which King George had touched the endowment. And his basic argument, without saying so, was this: he is a heretic, and if we hold to what he has done, we too are heretics because we are participating in his heresy. Gentlemen, will you therefore stand, arise as one, and declare our independence from this heretic? That was the basic argument. For 2 years they had fought this battle. On June 28th, he presented his document to the Continental Congress. The Continental Congress was, that by the way, was on a Friday afternoon. The Continental Congress did not take this issue up until the following Monday because it was a weekend. And on Monday, they took the issue up. 2 years they had fought. Pistols had hit the tables. You know the phrase, mind your P's and Q's? That comes right out of that period in time when the bartender would yell to the gentleman, gentlemen, mind your P's and Q's, your pints and quarts. In other words, you're consuming a little bit too much, talking a little too loud, and put the pistols away. Gentlemen, mind your P's and Q's. 2 years had it almost come to violence amongst their brethren. And Jefferson takes a different approach. The supposed deists appealed to the godliness and the righteousness and the Christianity of the gentleman in the hall. And he said, will you stand with this heretic or will you stand alone? Will we separate ourselves or will we be a part of this sin? On Tuesday night, they approved the Declaration of Independence. That was July 2nd. By the time the minor changes and commas and periods and question marks had been put in, it was July 4th, and they announced publicly this document. We have a Declaration of Independence, originally called the Unanimous Declaration. You see, that has been our heritage. When they wrote our Constitution, they gave us a tripartite Constitution. We had the administrative branch, we had the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. They gave us that because they saw in heaven a Trinity. The executive branch, God the Father. The legislative branch was the Son. Judicial branch, trying the conscience of men, the Holy Spirit. Do we see that today in anything we do? I was asked if Barack Obama was going to bring judgment on this land. I said, sadly, no, he is judgment on this land. Because he represents who we are. We've elected him twice. The congressmen that float around Washington, D.C. with every spiritual disease you can possibly catch. These represent the hearts of America. This is who we've become. I could go on and tell you of the annals of what's going on in history and the times God has saved us and the times that we could not have won. Look at the bravery of our past. Can you imagine what it took for our founding fathers to go up against England? That would be like sending the Texas National Guard against the Russian army. I mean, I love the Texas National Guard, but they're not going to fare well against. They're not going to fare well against the military might of Russia. But we did. We faced those odds. Look at the black soldiers that fought in the Civil War. Do you know we're the first nation on earth to go to war against itself to free a people within our own shores? It had never happened before. You realize when we created America, we were the first country in human history to build a government that had no subjects? Because we owned the government, it did not own us. First time in history it had happened. Do you see the hand of God in everything that's happened? It's our testimony. Well, it has happened again. The Second Great Awakening, we saw the Civil War. Why? Because men of faith could not stand, could not abide even one more day. The fact that human beings were enslaved. By the way, the Bible says that the penalty for buying someone that you know is kidnapped, someone that you know is a stolen person, is the death penalty. So buying someone that we knew was kidnapped and sold into slavery carried with it the death penalty. At the height of black slavery in America, we had about 750,000 black African slaves. We fought a civil war. Guess how many people died in the Civil War? 750,000. God assigned the death penalty for the purchase of stolen human beings, and it was carried out. The death penalty was also assigned for those who shed innocent blood. We've now killed 56 million babies in this country. What do you think the awful price for that might be before it's done? Because God is a just God and sentence will be carried out. And it's not going to be avoided and it's not going to be probated. It's going to be cast upon us. It isn't for future generations, it is here now. So we are going to have to decide who we are and what we are. And frankly, I believe that time is upon us. I believe that we have no more time to wait. You know, the call of the revolution against England. And little told in history and hardly ever told in classrooms anymore. To prove what I have just said with Jefferson, the cry of the late revolution was not down with King George. It was no king but King Jesus. That literally was the cry of the revolution from one end of the country to the other. No king but King Jesus. No God but our God. Well, we have fallen prey to the God state. The state that now says it can take the laws of eternity and throw them out. And each of us and all of us is going to have to decide where we stand. What will our testimony be? Will our testimony be that we were the generation that let the light of freedom flicker and to go out? Or will our testimony be that despite the odds, challenges, that we once again climbed that city set on a hill and we relit the fires of freedom? But there is no freedom without the spiritual understanding of what freedom is. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. America's lost the truth. We have right now more opportunity to share our faith than has ever existed before because of the political climate in which we find ourselves. If you can't find a way to talk politics and tell and lead someone back to an understanding of who God is and how God started this land and how God is still in control of what's going on, then you just ain't trying. Because right now, telling folks about our faith is about as easy as it gets. I'm head of an organization called Right 180, making a right turn coming 180 degrees from where we are. Our web platform, soon to be launched, is called Tapwires. And we're not about fair and balanced, we're about truth. I don't believe there is a moral equivalency between the right and the left, nor do I believe that we need to share what they're doing. That's pretty much already been shared in the news every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We are here to begin telling people the truth. This is what's happening. Part of our plan is not to, and I've heard this on Fox News and a number of other places, you're going to see an era of civil disobedience. Well, I don't believe in civil disobedience. I don't believe there's any cause for it, or need for it. Why don't we instead have constitutional obedience? Yeah. Why don't we as a state stand up and say, you know what, no more. March 9, 1933, Roosevelt gave us the Trading with the Enemies Act as he revised it. And basically what it said was, we're creating an emergency government and we're going to operate under that emergency government, and we no longer have really a constitutional need to read the Constitution. And that's why the courts, the Congress, the President act as though they have no Constitution. March 9, 1933, you, by the way, you can look it up in the Congressional Record. The Trading with the Enemies Act basically annulled the Constitution until further notice. Well, I'd like to give further notice. I believe that we can take the state of Texas and simply pronounce that we're going back to a constitutional understanding. There's going to be no more EPA here. There's going to be no more TSA here. There's going to be no more BATF here. We are going to take back our borders. We're going to take back our lakes, our streams, our geography. We're going to protect our people. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says if any state is in danger of invasion or is under invasion, they have the right to protect themselves in any way necessary to protect the people, the lands, and the waters of the state. We got 25 million Texans, 5 million illegals here. 500,000 crimes against Texans in the last 3.5 years. Are we getting close to an invasion? I think there are things we can do. For instance, I believe that we can set up enterprise zones in Mexico and take all of the illegals that are here, give them great jobs in Mexico, give them retirement benefits, medical benefits, give them all the things that will accompany life and happiness down there. So we don't have to round them up like cattle and chuck them over the Rio Grande and say, gosh, I hope you don't die over here. We can put them in a situation that is God-pleasing, and guess what? By doing that, we can set up firms down there that create assembly parts for electronics factories here in Texas, which creates great jobs. I believe that the Constitution says, in fact I know it says, that any state can issue currency anytime it wants to as long as it's 100% gold and silver backed. Can you imagine what it would be like in Texas if we had gold and silver banking? I had some economists look at what it would do to the economy of Texas, and they believe that we are now currently the 13th largest economy in the world, but that we would be in the top 5 economies in the world within 2 years, simply because we would have the only banking system on planet Earth that is gold and silver backed, and the wealth of the world would flow here simply because they would be convinced they could not lose their money. There is wisdom in what God says, because that is honest weights and measures. I could tell you about the two-tiered economy that we created, how it's going to create wealth in Texas. I could tell you a lot of things. But the first thing we have to do is elect people. We have to elect men of righteousness to office, and that really is where Tapwires comes in. Tapwires is a funding mechanism that basically will allow politicians to, with just a few thousand followers, to have $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a month coming into their campaigns that they're not having to raise. It's a very unique platform, never been created to my knowledge, anywhere in the world. The 10 companies we interviewed to build this platform sort of said the same thing. We got no clue how to build it. But we found one that caught the vision. God has given us an opportunity. And I am encouraged by a passage in Revelation. And that passage says, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sin, that ye receive not of her plagues." God is calling us out. Revelation says, "And Satan was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with her seed." That's us. We're that seed. Satan wants to make war with us. That's encouraging. In fact, if you can't get excited about that passage, you don't understand it. Because you see, if he has to make war against us, there's enough of us with enough power, enough resources to be a giant thorn in his keister. We have been a problem to Satan when we get to that passage. And we have enough resources that he had to make war against us. He couldn't just wish us gone. I really, really enjoy the role of being a spiritual thorn in Satan's keister. And that's our testimony. That's my testimony. To persevere. If you remember the Indian and the outlaw Josie Wales, he said two interesting things. He said, "I never surrendered. My horse surrendered." But at the signing ceremony, this general said, "Endeavor to persevere." Folks, we've been called to endeavor to persevere. This isn't about winning. This isn't about victory. This isn't about coming out on top. This is about walking out our destinies. Walking out our calling. I'm not in charge of winning. I'm in charge of walking out my calling. And how do you do it? I hear the church saying we need to act like Jesus. Folks, you ain't that good an actor. You'll never pull that role off. If you want to walk out your destiny, there is but one answer. To wake up every morning, climb up on the altar, crucify the flesh, that Messiah might live through you. And then you don't have to worry about whether or not he's walking out the calling, because he does only that which he sees the Father do. And that's what the church hasn't done, what we haven't taught people to do. Christianity is not a game. Christianity is not even a lifestyle. Christianity is a death style. We have to die to self that he might live through us. So when they see us, they no longer see us. They see Messiah living through us. And that's my testimony. My testimony is that my lovely bride and I have determined together that we are going to, whatever it takes, walk out our destinies. We are going to climb upon that altar and crucify the flesh, that Messiah might live through us. And that's the invitation I give to all of you today. To join us in climbing on that altar, crucifying the flesh, that Messiah might live through you. You see, that's our heritage. That's what we are owed. We are owed that opportunity, and the rest of the people in Texas are owed that opportunity. One of the planks of our plan is to release 25,000 apostolic evangelists in the state of Texas. They'll never build a church. They'll never have a storefront. Their job is simple. Just share your faith 4 times a day with anybody who will listen. Realize in less than a year's time, we would have shared the gospel with every living human being in Texas. Now that's a revolution. That's the kind of revolution I want to be a part of. Are we going to have to get involved politically, economically? Yes. But the real revolution comes at the foot of the cross. not at the Capitol steps in Austin. I thank you for allowing me to be here today. I appreciate you. I want you to live and be blessed. I want you to walk out your calling in Messiah. Because I want it said of us when all of this passes, that this truly was the greatest generation. Because we returned to Calvary. Bless you all, and thank you for the opportunity.